This is Distant Replay.
Well, it's part 2 now of our James Jordan episodes here on the True Crime edition of Distant Replay. We went through all the murder itself, everything leading up to the trial. So today we're focused on the trial itself, everything that happened within the trial, and then we got some more coming in a third part, which we're going to talk about the aftermath, some of the theories about what all went down, and a lot more. So still plenty to discuss here. And Mike, let's bring people up to speed on kind of where we are. We don't have to get into it in full detail. Everybody, I encourage you to go back and listen to our first part, which was a few episodes ago on our feed, and listen to it fully. But just quickly, an update on where we are as we head into trial.
All right, as we head into the trial of Daniel Green and Larry Demery have both been charged in the murder of James Jordan, Michael Jordan's father. Okay, in the first part, we went through the crime, how it allegedly happened, and how we got to the point where those two were arrested. And now in this episode, we're going to discuss the trial of Daniel Green. And then in part 3, which will be next week, we're going to go over some of the issues that came up in the trial regarding Robeson County, regarding some conspiracy theories that people have thrown out there regarding the murder of James Jordan, and we'll just kind of tie it up that way. But there's a lot of layers to this trial, so I wanted to give it its own episode.
Yeah, I was going to say there must be a little bit more to this trial than normal because you wanted to take your time with it. You didn't want to kind of rush through the details of the trial so that everybody could kind of really dig into what all went down before we actually get into the aftermath. So let's jump right into it.
Yep. All right. So one thing to remember about the relationship between Daniel and Larry, I kind of mentioned it in the last episode, is that these guys are boys. I mean, like since like third grade. You know, they're what, 18, 19 years old at this point. Like they're boys, like best friends. All right.
Right.
And it all dates back to Daniel got teased a lot when he was a kid for stuttering. And Larry was one of the only kids when he was little that like would stick up for Daniel and wouldn't tease him about his stuttering. And that's kind of how their friendship sort of blossomed and, you know, got to where it was in July of 1993 when they're accused of, you know, this horrible crime. So that's a little background on why Daniel is so loyal to Larry. I think that's important to understand. Also, very rare for this area in Robeson County. Think of Robeson County, Ben, as 3 distinct groups of people living there. You have the white community, the black community, and the Native American community. As we mentioned last episode, Larry is Native American, Daniel is black. It was very rare for people from those two groups to sort of commingle and be really good friends. And they said that Larry and Daniel were such good friends, they didn't care about that. That was never an issue with them. So again, it just goes to show, because it plays an important role in how this trial pans out, you know, how close of friends they actually were. All right.
Okay.
Now, where we begin here is Larry took a plea deal. So we're going to go over the trial of Daniel Green today. Larry Demery says, you know, I was involved in a murder of James Jordan. Basically, he takes the plea, but he can still be found guilty and get the death penalty. So they can't take the death penalty off the table for him testifying against his co-defendant. So the deal obviously is, hey, I'll take a plea and I'll testify against Daniel Green. Well, in the state of North Carolina back then in 1993, you couldn't testify against your co-defendant as a way to not get the death penalty. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense to why you would do it if you weren't guaranteed anything.
That's a great point, Ben. So to clarify, it's one of those things where like the prosecutor would put in a good word for you with the judge.
Right.
Where like, hey, look, he was cooperative with us. We feel he was honest. He was honest in his testimony. Please take this into consideration when you're sentencing him. That kind of thing.
Right.
So he pled guilty to first-degree murder. So what we know now, as of now, is that Larry Demery is saying I was definitely involved in this murder. Okay?
Okay.
Obviously now the issue is Larry has one story, Daniel has another story, right? What the court is basically trying to decide here in Daniel Green's trial is who is the leader and who is the follower, right? That's been kind of what we're trying to figure out ever since they got charged with the crime, all right?
Okay.
Daniel Green's trial doesn't start until January 3rd, 1996, which is a full 2.5 years after the murder. Obviously, as you can imagine, just a huge media presence for this trial. Just kind of took Robeson County by storm, if you will. This is a little county in North Carolina now under all this media attention.
I don't remember. Was this on court TV and had the full treatment that we saw with like the OJ trial right around the same time?
I don't think so, because all the transcripts that I heard from the trial were audio.
Okay.
So I don't know if cameras were allowed in the courtroom. I would assume not.
Gotcha.
Everything I heard was audio. So the defense basically says that, hey, look, the prosecution zeroed in on these suspects and ignored very important evidence. That's what their opening statement says. The prosecution says, look, we have cell phone evidence. We have James Jordan's belongings. We have multiple people testifying to seeing these guys with their belongings in the car, etc.
Yeah.
Their case, the prosecution's case, what's important to understand is it's all circumstantial, except because, just theoretically, just because they have his car and they have his belongings doesn't mean they killed him, right?
Correct.
In theory. Where it all comes together for the prosecution is flipping Larry Demery and now having him fingering Daniel Green. That's the only direct evidence they have, okay? Daniel says, all right, he did drive around in the car, but didn't know it was James Jordan or his belongings. And I'll get to what his story was a little bit later. The judge said, do you remember that video that I mentioned last episode? The video of Daniel
rapping and had all the stuff on,
with Mr. Jordan's belongings on. The judge ruled they couldn't show that video in court, but they could show still photos of the video, right? So they're still able to present some evidence with that. So the first thing is to ascertain how the weapon used in the shooting, right? It was a .38 caliber. The prosecution's theory is, and this is backed up by Larry Demery, is that there was a convenience store owned by a man named Clewis Demery, no relation to Larry Demery. He fingered Daniel Green as someone who robbed him 8 days before the Jordan murder and claimed that his gun was stolen during the robbery and that the gun was a .38, the same gun used in the murder of James Jordan and the same gun, if you remember, Ben, that was found in the shop vac in Daniel's mother's mobile home, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, some people think Larry knew about the robbery because he robbed Clewis Demery with someone else. Larry was into a lot of stuff and criminal activity, most notably like in the drug trade, with people that outside of Daniel Green. So he did things with Daniel, committed crimes with Daniel. It's well documented, but also had other people he was involved with as well. So that's what the defense says. Well, that's how Larry knows about the gun, and that's why Larry backs up the story with the gun, is because he's the one who robbed the convenience store and took the gun. Okay. Another thing about the shop vac that's important to know as well is Larry was actually staying at Daniel's house during this whole time. So when that gun was found in the shop vac, Larry was staying in the house. To sort of wrap it up on the gun, the ballistic evidence that they had, and it was I watched this whole segment of a documentary on how they kind of decipher what the ballistic evidence is. How it's to see how it matches to, the subject's bullets. The ballistic evidence could not conclusively prove that the .38 caliber found in the shop vac was used in the murder, but they couldn't prove it wasn't used either. It was basically inconclusive. Okay. All right. So that's sort of the weapon aspect of this. As far as the theory for the state on how the crime happened, they said Mr. Jordan fell asleep. His passenger side window was open. They said that then he was shot at close range through the open window. All right. Okay. Then people question, well, why is there no blood in the vehicle?
Yeah, right.
There was no blood in the vehicle. They drove him 35 miles to dump his body. How can there be no blood? Experts said, though, that people can be shot and not bleed right away.
I mean, how rare is that?
I had never heard. That would obviously have to mean that the bullet was shot into Mr. Jordan and it got lodged in there, right? And didn't exit. Yeah. But I'm not aware of, based on how his body is positioned in the car, would that cause the blood to definitely pool up on the car seat. Because remember, they put him over in the passenger seat and drove him to where they dumped his body over the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
So Demery testifies, right? So we get to Demery's testifying in court here. He testifies that he and Green were stalking the area around the highway and the hotel for someone to rob. Their initial plan was to carjack someone, let them out of the car, and steal it. He says they went to the passenger side of the vehicle and the window was open. James Jordan woke up in the middle of this, like, hey, kind of like in a fog, like, hey, what's going on? You know, when you wake up and you're getting disturbed.
Mm-hmm.
And Larry Demery says before he knew it, Daniel Green shot James Jordan. That it was not a part of the plan, but that Daniel shot James Jordan before Demery even had a chance to react.
Like just probably got shocked or, surprised, and first reaction was to shoot.
Yeah, that's what Larry Demery says.
Okay.
He also says then they went down the street, parked the car in a cornfield, and started to take things from Mr. Jordan. This is where they get the ring. This is where they get, all the other stuff that Daniel was wearing and the watch that Daniel was wearing in the video. This is when they find out going through his wallet that it's Michael Jordan's dad. Okay. Then Demery says, they're like, man, we have to dump this body somewhere, right? Logical next step if you're going to commit a murder, all right? They first go to dump the body at a waste treatment plant that Daniel knows of, but there was a security gate put up in between the last time Daniel had been there and this night. So they said, all right, well, we can't dump the body there. Then Demery actually recommended throwing the body off a bridge into the water. So that's where they drive, the half hour away, dump the body over a bridge into the water, which is eventually where Mr. Jordan would be found. Okay.
Okay.
Now picture this if you're Daniel Green. His best friend in the world is not only accusing him of murder, but in Daniel Green's eyes is telling complete lies to get himself off and to get himself out of get himself out of being sentenced to the death penalty.
Yeah.
All right. Green, it's to the point where Green gets physically ill when Larry's testifying against him and has to go to the hospital because of it.
Jeez.
One thing of note about Demery's story was that he changed the story multiple times before the trial. And each time, each story placed him closer and closer to Daniel Green at the time of the murder. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So the case, remember, it's important to remember, the case is entirely circumstantial without his testimony against Daniel. So in order for his testimony to stick and to have value to those same prosecutors who are going to put in a good word for him to avoid the death penalty, he has to put himself as in the know as possible, right?
Right.
And that's what people who kind of doubt Larry Demery will be quick to mention. One other thing I found that was very odd was they were both in custody at the same time, obviously, awaiting trial or awaiting this to play out. The police let Larry Demery go home to his house and have dinner with his family on Sundays.
Wow.
Isn't that, have you ever heard of that?
I mean, in the middle of a murder trial to say, go home for dinner.
You're being held on, he admitted to first degree murder.
Yeah.
And he's being permitted to go home on Sundays to have dinner with his family. And obviously that's people bring up, that's treatment Daniel Green didn't get. You know what I mean?
That's amazing. Yeah.
Now the defense's argument is, they said they do not deny that Daniel drove around in the car. They do not deny that he had Mr. Jordan's possessions, but that he was not there when James Jordan was shot. He was being a loyal friend to Larry because he knew Larry was going to be in deep trouble. And that's how Daniel's loyalty to Larry brought up again. And that he got into this whole mess because of his loyalty to his friend. They say, the defense says, we have alibi witnesses that were watching TV with Daniel Green on the entire night in question. So the story is, it's Daniel Green, a couple girls, and Larry Demery hanging out. Larry Demery left the hangout. Okay, now the two girls testified to this in court. Larry Demery's there hanging out with them, trying to get Daniel Green to go out with him. But Daniel is, quite frankly, with a girl and he doesn't want to leave. All right. Mm-hmm. So Larry leaves without him. Then Larry comes back visibly upset, pulls Daniel kind of to a private conversation. They have a conversation. And this is when, presumably, according to the defense, Larry tells him what happened. Then Daniel makes up an excuse that Larry has like a flat tire or something going on and that he has to leave the house. They're at Daniel's house. Daniel's mother did not want him to leave the house, but he did very late at night with Larry. Okay? Then the defense says Larry brings him to the Lexus and then to the body. So that when Daniel went into the Lexus, then he told him, hey, look, I have someone in, Larry told him basically, I have someone in the trunk right now who's dead. Larry says, this is a guy I got into a squabble with over a drug deal, and I had to do what I had to do. I killed the man. He's in the trunk, you know. Obviously, Daniel has no clue it's Michael Jordan's father. He has no clue, according to the defense, that it was even an older man that was involved here, all right?
Yeah.
And then that's when they went and dumped his body over the bridge, okay? During the process, now this is a very big part of the trial.
Okay.
So I just explained what the prosecution said happened, what the defense said happened, right? Again, a matter of trying to decipher who is the ringleader here, right?
Mm-hmm.
During the trial, the prosecutors, this is the biggest part of the trial to me. During the trial, a prosecutor named Johnson Britt stated that the fact that Daniel Green didn't testify was a huge red flag. That, hey, look, we have his attorneys outlining this alibi, but we don't have Daniel Green taking the stand and pounding the table about his alibi. He's telling the jury that that's a big red flag. This is supposedly a huge no-no for a prosecutor to do because it's a defendant's constitutional right whether to testify or not.
Right.
Like, I didn't know. I knew that obviously it was a constitutional right to testify or not, but I didn't know this is like a huge no-no for a prosecutor to bring up, mainly because maybe it's such a bad thing to do. I've never seen it before. Now,
Maybe.
Johnson Britt, I saw like a interview with Johnson Britt, like present day, and he admits, like, look, I made a huge mistake. I was emotional, and I made a gigantic mistake by doing it. But he's let off the hook in a big way, right?
Okay.
So what happens is the defense pursues a motion for a mistrial based on the conduct of Prosecutor Britt. The defendant, though, in this case, has to agree to pursue a mistrial. So it can't just be, you get what I mean? It can't just be his counsel talking for him.
Okay.
Daniel Green, for some reason, thinks if I agree to this and a mistrial is declared, they can try me again, which I don't want. What Daniel Green's not aware of in the moment is if it was declared a mistrial, that they would not have been able to try him again. There was miscommunication on that. So from Daniel Green's standpoint, he thinks the prosecutor's intentionally trying to throw the case because he thinks he's going to lose it, and that the mistrial would be a way for them to be able to try Daniel Green again.
So he thinks the prosecutor's trying to get a reset, essentially, in the trial.
Exactly. When in reality, if the mistrial would have went through, he could not have been retried. Okay?
So Green's lawyer's not instructing him that, hey, a mistrial is a good thing right now?
It sounded to me like it was kind of a spur of the moment thing that came up, and maybe he was not counseled the way he should have been, or even if he was, the communication wasn't clear, because I tried to research that, Ben, and I could not find definitively what the communication was between the defense and his client, Daniel Green.
Yeah.
But in essence, Daniel Green disagrees with his counsel, and because he thinks Britt's trying to intentionally throw the case.
Yeah.
Johnson Britt, even to this day, says, look, if he had agreed, to the hearing for the mistrial, to the motion for the mistrial, that Johnson Britt thinks he would have gotten off. That that a mistrial would have been declared. That's how egregious of an error that is to do what Johnson Britt did. That, to me, when I researched this and I saw it in a documentary that I watched, I was like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah, it's a get out of jail free card.
And Daniel Green, even in interviews, admits, I made a huge mistake. I wasn't really educated on what was going on, and I made a huge mistake. So now, with that passed, we go to the jury. We go to the jury making their decision. The defense has presented their case. Prosecution's presented theirs. Now it's time for the jury to deliberate. We get to your favorite part, Ben. How long do you think the jury deliberated before making a decision?
These things either go one of two ways. Either it takes forever or it happens in an hour or two.
What do you think?
I'm going to say it happened quickly.
4 hours.
Jeez.
4 hours. He's convicted on, it is unbelievable, convicted on all 3 charges, which include first-degree murder and armed robbery. This I've never seen before either. Again, it just shows you how different every state is. He got to make a statement to the court, minutes after he found out he was convicted of first-degree murder, he made a statement to the court and got sentenced right on the spot. Literally, verdict read, makes a statement, sentenced on the spot to life in prison.
Jeez. Okay.
And you just, and that, brings sort of the trial to an end for Daniel Green. And it makes you think, man, how flimsy of a case the prosecution had when their only really legitimate evidence came from the direct testimony of Larry Demery.
Right. It was basically he said, she said, right? I mean, it was, or he said, he said, but I mean, they basically both said the same thing. He was involved. I wasn't. I was just helping out.
Yeah, and the jury believed in the end, the circumstantial evidence combined with Larry Demery's testimony was enough to convict Daniel Green. And what we try to do here, for those of you who maybe have never listened to our podcast, is we try to do exactly what I did, present what the prosecution said happened, present what the defense said happened, and sort of leave it up to you, our audience, to sort of be able to decipher what you think happened, So I'm not taking a side here. I'm just saying that was the defense's case. It was Larry Demery's eyewitness involved in the crime testimony that he made in exchange for really the prosecutor putting in a good word for him so he didn't get the death penalty.
Wow.
And it just, it can't be underscored that the ballistics weren't a conclusive match. There was no other direct evidence. And Daniel Green, first-degree murder, life in prison, and, we sort of go from there.
Wow. So pretty abrupt ending to the trial. I mean, from the point where the trial ended to Green getting sentenced to life in prison was like, what, just a handful of hours, essentially? I mean, that's crazy.
And especially when you consider that whole issue with the mistrial I mentioned before.
Yeah.
Like, I wish I could have found more information on that. I guess the only way to get information on that would be from his attorney. And the only attorney I was able to get any kind of recent comments from was the prosecutor, not Daniel Green's defense lawyer.
Right. Well, pretty amazing. So what do we have coming up on part 3 then, Mike? Where do we go from here?
So part 3, I'm putting the finishing touches on now. It's basically going to be sort of a little history on Robeson County, where this trial took place, and how people think that may have influenced the jury, how they think it may have influenced the verdict. Some more stuff on Larry Demery and why maybe he was not that credible of a witness, and just overall like some theories that have floated around on the internet and, in real life regarding this case. There's been a lot of them, like, did Michael Jordan's gambling have something to do with this? You know what I mean? Like things like that. Sort of try to research those and dispel ones that are ridiculous, or, just give our thoughts on those.
Very good. Well, very interesting trial so far. I'm very curious to see what else we hear in episode 3. So make sure you subscribe to the show, follow us, rate, review, all those things. Help us out a lot. Leave us some comments. Give us your thoughts as well, wherever you're listening to us. And we'll be back again for the conclusion of this. But still other stuff to come. We're doing a lot of NFL draft stuff right now, so make sure you check out the rest of the feed.
Absolutely. Rate, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.